In this daily drop, we're going to talk about ND filters and how they are rated and labeled, and hopefully take away some of the confusion that you might have related to that. So let's go. All right, it's a new day and a new episode of the Daily Drop, and today I want to talk about ND filters. I'm sure we're going to be doing this a lot more in other scenarios, but let's first start with the way they're labeled, because for me and for a lot of you, it can be confusing. So the first thing is that an ND filter, of course, is cutting how much light is coming into your camera system. It's supposed to be neutral, meaning it's not supposed to create a color cast. And the way manufacturers will label how much light is being reduced coming into your camera is one of three different ways, unfortunately. And this is because of a few different reasons, but let's just take a look at the different ways that they can be labeled. Now, the first one makes the most sense to me and probably will to you, which is how many stops is that ND filter reducing the amount of light that's coming in. So if it's a one-stop ND, it's letting in half as much light into the camera system, and that means your exposure should be half as bright. If it's a two-stop ND, then it's halved again, so that's 4 times less light. Then 3 stops, half again, 8 times less light. Half again, 16 times less light for a 4-stop ND, so on and so forth. Well, I've got 4 different ND filters here, actually 5 because there's one on this camera. This one is labeled ND64. This one right here, which is a fixed ND, is labeled 2.4. Very different naming convention. And then I have a couple of variable NDs which change when you're turning them. One is an ND8 to a 128, and one is an ND2 to a 400. So pretty confusing. So let's just clear that confusion up. First of all, let's talk about the numbered system that starts with 2 and then goes all the way up in multiples of 2, meaning times 2. So you've got an ND2, ND4, ND8, ND16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, so on and so forth. So that labeling system, when we started ND2, means we're halving the amount of light. And then we go to ND4, that's 4 times less light. ND8, 8 times. Or we can look at it as a half, a fourth, an eighth, a 16th, a 32nd. So you can think about there being an imaginary 1 with a slash before it, and then you can see how many stops are being reduced. So that's just the way that labeling system works, and that's an ND factor. So we go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, so on and so forth. The other one is a density rating, and fortunately or unfortunately, unfortunately, because now we have another way to actually rate it, it's in 0.3 increments. So this is an ND 2.4. So let's do the math. A 0.3 is 1 stop. A 0.6 is 2. A 0.9 is 3 stops. A 1.2 is 4 stops. A 1.5 is 5 stops. A 1.8, 6 stops. A 2.1, 7 stops. And a 2.4, 8 stops. So this is an 8-stop ND. And then over here, we have an ND8 to a 128. So remember, let's do the math again. So an ND2 is 1 stop, an ND4, 2 stops, ND8 is 3 stops. So this is starting at a 3 stop, and then it goes up to a 128, which happens to be 7 stops of ND, right? A 256 would be 8 stops, or again, we call that 2.4. Ridiculous. Why can't they just call it stops? And then this one is an ND2. That means it's starting at 1 stop of ND all the way up to a 400. Weird number. Well, 256 is 8 stops. 512 is 9 stops. So this is actually in between them. An ND 400 is actually 8 2/3 of a stop. Crazy. This is the math of photography and cinematography. But at least now you can understand, and let's just take a look at this up on the screen, that an ND2 is the same thing as a 0.3, which equals 1 stop. An ND4 is the same thing as a 0.6, which equals 2 stops. And you can see here the math going all the way up to 8 stops of ND for each of those labels. All right, there you have it. Hopefully that helps a little bit when you are choosing ND filters. I have another episode coming up which has to do with ND. Don't forget to, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Daily Drop.